I'm Kara Gothier, and this is Infertility Mental Health, episode number 4. Infertility is mentally exhausting. I know, I've been through it, and the toll it takes on your emotional well-being is significant. If you are stuck in infertility limbo right now, this is the podcast for you. My name is Kara Gothier, and I am the infertility life coach, the mother of 2 manifested miracles, and I can teach you how to be mentally healthy during this chapter of life. If you are ready for change, if you are ready for your real life to begin now, join me, and let's get into the mindset to motherhood. Hello there, aspiring mama, and welcome to the show. If you are interested in improving your mental health and taking yourself to the next level of your life, then this is the podcast for you. And if you're new here, welcome. And if you have returned from a previous episode, welcome back. I'm so delighted that you are here and that you've found this information and you are interested in doing this work, because I promise you it will change everything about your path going forward to motherhood. The topic of today's podcast is kind of a topic that's near and dear to my heart: failure. Specifically, dealing with repeated failure when it comes to infertility is something that I see come up so many times with my clients. It came up with myself as a major roadblock to get to my ultimate goal of motherhood. Dealing with the failure was something that I had to learn how to do. And it took me a long time to figure out that process. And once I finally did, things were expedited. Things were expedited for me in my path to motherhood. And I watched this happen over and over with my clients too. As soon as they figure out how to deal with repeated failure, they take on a new perspective about this path and this journey and what they need to do to get to their ultimate goal, which is, for most of them, motherhood. So in this episode, we're going to talk about failure and why people are so adamantly opposed to experiencing it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personal story with failure and infertility, and I'm going to teach you a couple tools from the life coaching perspective that you can use going forward if you are in the midst of dealing with repeated failure in your own path to motherhood. Failure isn't a new concept with infertility. In fact, there is something to fail at with every step of the infertility process. A failed cycle, a failed retrieval, a failed transfer, a failed beta, let alone the multiple tests your body will be measured against to fail in comparison. There are so many opportunities to experience failure, but not much information on how to actually handle it and then keep going forward in the process. So that's what we're going to dive into in this episode. Failure happens when something that we intended didn't turn out as we expected it to, and the outcome was something different than what we wanted to have happen. There are so many opportunities to experience failure, but not much information on how to actually handle it and then keep going forward in the process. So that's what we're going to dive into in this episode, and I'm going to help you as you're working towards this goal deal with your own failure. People that are going through infertility have had a good dose of failure already. I mean, you can't get to an infertility diagnosis without failing. But here's what happens when you start to fail things repeatedly. You start to place meaning on that failure as a reflection of yourself. It then influences what you tell yourself about what your ability is, what you're capable of, what your body's capable of, what your future should look like. Everything from that moment, from when you have failed and then you make it mean something negative about yourself, influences everything else that comes after. And this can be a huge roadblock in getting to your ultimate goal of motherhood, because if you have experienced a lot of situations that you've perceived as failure and you have made that mean something incredibly negative about yourself, you are less likely to continue to take action to move forward in the process. An example of this from my own infertility experience, when my husband and I were going through fertility treatment for the first time, we were doing IUIs, and we did 3 of them before I got pregnant. And we were over the moon elated to be pregnant. It seemed like we had been through so much at that point, and that we were just like, we'd finally gotten our answer. Ultimately, I experienced a miscarriage with that pregnancy, and that I will save the full story for that for a different podcast. But that moment when I had that miscarriage, that was such a moment of despair and sadness for me. And I did not believe in myself and believe in my body and believe what was possible for my goal to be achieved after that. As a consequence, I didn't want to go through any more fertility treatment. I did not want to experience that again. I was so upset and ill-equipped at that moment to deal with all of the emotions that I was having. I just didn't want to pursue it anymore, which put me in a bit of a tricky situation because I still wanted to experience mother. I still deeply wanted that goal, but I was so fearful of dealing with the emotions of failing that I would not make that action step to move forward beyond that. And I stayed in that state for a long time, several months, almost up to a year of time, where I felt that I couldn't deal with another failure, so I didn't even want to try. Obviously, when you have an infertility diagnosis and you're not pursuing any treatment or action to change the course of that, nothing is likely to happen. And that's kind of the space that I lived in for a good chunk of time, where I was just fearful of moving forward, being successful moving forward, and then dealing with another experience of failure, another miscarriage, another failed, cycle, anything like that. I was just fearful of experiencing that failure. But here's the perspective that I want to offer you. Failure is part of the overall process of infertility. Like I said before, failure comes down to recognizing that something that we intended didn't turn out as we expected it to, and the outcome was something different than what we wanted. So to combat the feeling of failure, most people lower their expectations so that they will not experience it, like myself. And this does 2 things. It distracts us from achieving our goals, and it protects us from something we fear that we have complete control over. That thing that we have complete control over is our emotions. Essentially, we avoid failing because we don't want to experience the feeling of failure. We are afraid of a feeling, a simple vibration in our bodies that's caused by a thought that we think. The truth is that we are in complete control over having the experience of failure at any moment, because it is a feeling being driven by a thought in our minds. We can control what we think when we don't meet our own expectations, and therefore how we feel in the process. When going through infertility, you must be willing to experience the emotion of failure repeatedly in this process as you are working towards that goal of motherhood. But here's the difference that I want you to think about the next time you are faced with a failure. Once you fail, you must then decide what it means. What does that failure tell you about yourself? What does it tell you or determine about your ability and your future success? Failure is just a platform for us to make decisions about how we think about ourselves going forward. It's an opportunity for self-love, which means that you have your own back through your mistakes and failure. Repeatedly on with my clients is the concept of self-love, where you decide that you've got yourself, you have got your back. You are not going to badmouth yourself. You are not going to run down your dreams. You are not going to do anything that detracts from your ultimate goal by the story that you create for yourself. Failure doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't need to mean anything about you, and it doesn't need to mean anything about what you are capable of for your future success, for your future fertility, for your future family, any of that. It doesn't have to do with any of it. So to begin doing this work, you have to recognize what it is you're telling yourself after you experience something that you perceive as a failure. What is that story that you're creating? What are those sentences in your mind that you are telling yourself that bring up that vibration, that emotion of failure for you? The next thing you must do is recognize that the thing that you are perceiving, that you're interpreting as a failure, is a completely neutral event. I know that's hard to grasp, especially if it's something like a failed transfer or a failed cycle or a failed pregnancy, but it is a completely neutral event. It's something that you had no control over, that is a circumstance in your life. The difference then becomes what you choose to think about that circumstance. What do you tell yourself about it? What do you make it mean about you? For me, after I experienced the miscarriage following fertility treatment, I told myself a really awful story about my ability, my body, and my future. And I lived that story for months. And it played out in all of my actions, and it played out in the results that I got, because I didn't move forward at all in my pursuit of motherhood while I was telling myself that story. The story I was thinking was driving the feelings I was having, and from those feelings I was choosing to not take action towards my goal, and ultimately the result was I wasn't getting anywhere with my goal of motherhood. So if you are dealing with repeated failure, I have sort of a 3-step process for you that can help immensely as you're dealing with this experience. First step is you have to decide you have your own back. You have to decide that you are your biggest cheerleader and your biggest supporter in the experience that you're going through. This means that you don't say negative things about yourself and what you're capable of after an event that has happened that you've perceived or classified as a failure. The second step is that you have to question the story that you're telling yourself about what happened. If you are using this event as evidence to craft a negative story about yourself and what you can do, pay attention to that. Question what it is you're actually saying that you are capable of doing. And the third step is to refocus your ultimate goal on what you're after. Refocus your attention and your thoughts and what you are really after in this whole process. When you refocus your attention and you actually bring it back to why you were there in the first place, why you are subjecting yourself to this experience, then it becomes more clear about what you're doing and why you're there doing it. Something that you will start to notice if you implement these steps is that when you fail in the future, you will have much more confidence in your ability to fail well, recover, and then fail again, and keep going along the lines of this process until you get to that goal that you're ultimately after. And with that, I want to wrap up this episode this week and just remind you, in case you haven't heard this from anyone in your life lately, but you are wise, you are whole, and you are worthy of everything you want your life to be, even during infertility. I love you, and I will talk to you in the next episode. If what I said in this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to download the Infertility Mental Health Checklist, which is a document of 9 life coaching tools that will help you through the struggle. If you want that, go to my website, infertilitylifecoach.com/checklist, and sign up.